On a crisp autumn morning in a bustling American metropolis, a city where towering glass skyscrapers stand side by side with venerable brick institutions that have witnessed generations pass, the familiar rhythms of daily life were suddenly interrupted by a question so bold it seemed to shatter the established order. How can a little girl replace the greatest man? This query, voiced almost like a sudden clap of thunder amid the steady hum of the city, rippled through crowded subway platforms, echoing off the polished facades of historic government buildings, and resonated in the hearts of every citizen who had long equated authority with experience and gravitas. From the early hours of dawn, as the first rays of the golden sun crept over the horizon and painted the skyline in hues of amber and rose, the city awoke to a palpable sense of anticipation. The avenues, lined with trees whose leaves blazed like fire against the crisp blue sky, became a stage for an unseen drama. In coffee shops where baristas poured steaming lattes with practiced precision, on busy sidewalks teeming with commuters, and even in quiet moments on park benches, people exchanged furtive glances and hushed remarks about this seemingly impossible notion. How could a tiny child, with hardly a decade of life behind her, append the legacy of one of America's most revered leaders? In neighborhoods both affluent and modest, in boardrooms where decisions that affected thousands were made, and in the quiet living rooms of families gathered around television sets, this question took on a life of its own. It was as if the very air vibrated with the energy of change, a subtle, almost imperceptible yet undeniably powerful force that signaled the dawn of a new era. Even the elements seemed to conspire in this moment of metamorphosis. A gentle breeze swept through urban canyons, rustling discarded newspapers and stirring up memories of past revolutions, while the distant rumble of a freight train on the outskirts of the city evoked a sense of impending transformation. At the heart of this awakening was an undeniable undercurrent of both trepidation and hope. The citizens, many of whom had grown accustomed to the familiar cadence of a leader whose name, Jackson Rivers, had become synonymous with stability, integrity, and the very ideals upon which the nation was built, found themselves questioning what they had long taken for granted. Here was a man who had weathered countless storms, whose decisions had steered the country through economic downturns and social upheavals alike. Yet now, in a single breathless moment, the mantle of leadership appeared vulnerable to the unexpected, the unorthodox, a tiny beacon of innocence challenging the might of tradition. Amid the concrete and steel, as the morning light danced on the windows of venerable institutions and modern high-rises alike, the city's pulse quickened. Sidewalks that had seen generations pass by now buzzed with an energy born of possibility. The question rang out not as an accusation, but as an invitation, a call to re-examine the very nature of power, authority, and what it means to lead. In that instant, every passerby, from suited executives hurrying to meetings in downtown skyscrapers to teenagers loitering near graffiti-tagged walls in artsy districts, felt an inexplicable stirring of curiosity and wonder. In neighborhoods steeped in history, where every block told a story of triumphs and tribulations, of civil rights marches and community rallies, the old order began to tremble ever so slightly. Stories of heroism and leadership that had been etched in the collective memory for decades were now being reread through the eyes of a new generation. And then, as if summoned by the very spirit of change, she appeared. A little girl, dressed in a simple faded cotton dress that carried hints of worn-out denim and timeless Americana, stepped into view. Her eyes, wide with a mix of wonder and determination, shone like twin beacons of unspoiled truth against the backdrop of a city steeped in tradition. No grand proclamation preceded her arrival. There were no rallying cries or orchestrated spectacles, only the quiet, unassuming presence of a child whose very existence seemed to challenge the entrenched norms of authority. In her silent determination, the little girl embodied the possibility of renewal. She did not speak with the pomp of rhetoric nor brandish symbols of power. Her message was carried solely in the purity of her gaze and the soft cadence of her steps on the time-worn pavement. For many, her presence was a living allegory, a reminder that leadership could be born not solely of age or experience but of an unburdened clarity of vision and a heart untainted by cynicism. As the city absorbed this perplexing yet exhilarating twist of fate, the established order, represented by figures like Jackson Rivers, began to feel the tremors of change. The mighty oak of traditional leadership, once thought invincible, now found its roots questioned by the tender shoot of youthful hope. And so, with every whispered conversation in dimly lit diners, every reflective pause in bustling street corners, the question resonated louder. Could the purity of a child's perspective unlock doors that had long been shut by years of convention and self-interest? In the interplay of light and shadow on busy avenues and quiet alleys alike, the morning unfolded as a living testament to the paradox of progress. The city, with its storied past and unyielding present, found itself at the crossroads of destiny, a juncture where the old guard's authority was not so much challenged as it was invited to evolve. The question, both audacious and tender, had set in motion a ripple effect that promised to carry the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future. And in that moment, the pulse of America quickened as if in unison with the heartbeat of a nation on the verge of rediscovering the true essence of leadership. Jackson Rivers, a name that for decades had evoked images of unwavering resolve, steadfast tradition, and the very embodiment of American leadership, was a figure whose legacy was interwoven with the fabric of the nation's history. Born in the heartland of America, where golden fields of wheat and sprawling cornfields stretched as far as the eye could see, Jackson's early life was steeped in the values of hard work, community, and an unyielding commitment to justice. His journey from a modest upbringing in a small Midwestern town to the pinnacle of national leadership was nothing short of legendary, a narrative marked by both personal sacrifice and triumph over adversity. In his youth, Jackson faced challenges that would have daunted a lesser soul. On a particularly bitter winter's evening in a rural community near Des Moines, a sudden blizzard had stranded travelers on a lonely country road. With little more than a thick woolen coat and an unshakable sense of duty, a young Jackson rushed into the storm to aid an elderly neighbor whose car had broken down. That act of kindness, though seemingly insignificant at the time, would later crystallize into a defining moment of his character, a testament to the belief that true strength is measured not by physical might, but by the capacity for compassion and decisive action. Over the years, Jackson Rivers emerged as a leader who was as comfortable in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. as he was in the humble settings of local community centers in small-town America. His piercing brown eyes, set beneath a furrowed brow that spoke of both determination and empathy, became symbolic of a man who had seen the country through its darkest hours and helped guide it toward the light. His speeches, resonant and measured, drew upon a deep well of personal experience, and he was known to illustrate his points with stories that, though simple in form, carried profound lessons about perseverance, duty, and the common good. One of his most memorable anecdotes, recounted countless times at town hall meetings and televised addresses alike, involved an unexpected encounter in a small Midwestern town. During one of his frequent tours across the heartland, Jackson came upon a modest community center where a group of local children had gathered to perform a spontaneous skit about everyday acts of heroism. In that unpretentious setting, complete with mismatched chairs and faded posters celebrating past local achievements, Jackson found himself deeply moved by the earnestness of the children's performance. As he later recounted in a stirring interview, he explained that even in the simplest acts of everyday life, there existed a wellspring of courage and hope that could, in time, galvanize entire communities into action. It wasn't a grand act of patriotism, he once said, but a quiet reminder that greatness can be found in the smallest gestures, a lesson that has guided me through the toughest challenges. As the years passed, Jackson's reputation only grew, solidifying his status as a living embodiment of American resilience and responsibility. His public appearances, whether at high-profile political rallies or intimate gatherings in neighborhood diners, carried an aura of authenticity that resonated with citizens across the socio-economic spectrum. There was an almost palpable warmth in his voice, a low, steady timbre that seemed to reassure even the most anxious listeners that no matter how turbulent the times, there was always a path forward, paved by shared values and mutual respect. Jackson Rivers' leadership was built on a foundation of inclusivity and a deep-rooted belief in the power of community. He was a man who believed that every citizen, from the smallest town in rural America to the sprawling urban centers of the coasts, possessed a spark of potential waiting to be ignited by understanding and empathy. His policies, forged through a combination of hard-nosed realism and visionary idealism, reflected a delicate balance between preserving the cherished traditions of the past and embracing the innovative possibilities of the future. In his eyes, leadership was not an exercise in authoritarian command, but a collaborative effort to uplift the nation as a whole. Yet, amid all his accolades and the reverence in which he was held, there remained a quiet vulnerability in Jackson, a recognition that no one, however great, was immune to the winds of change. Even as his legacy was celebrated in headlines and on commemorative monuments across the country, Jackson Rivers harbored a personal conviction that true leadership was a continuous journey of growth, fueled by the lessons of both triumph and failure. His life, punctuated by moments of hard-fought victory and the humbling weight of responsibility, stood as a living testament to the idea that greatness was not a fixed attribute but an evolving state of being. In the hallowed halls of power, where decisions that shaped the destiny of millions were made, Jackson Rivers was more than a figurehead. He was a mentor, a unifier, and an inspiration. His story, replete with episodes of quiet heroism and bold, decisive action, resonated deeply with an entire nation. For many Americans, his visage, etched into memory through decades of broadcast speeches, newspaper portraits, and even community murals, became synonymous with the enduring spirit of the United States. And though the passage of time would eventually cast its own light on the impermanence of all things, the legend of Jackson Rivers remained a beacon for those who believed that leadership, at its core, was about the capacity to serve, inspire, and ultimately, transform the lives of others. Just as the city had been gripped by the weight of tradition and the steady beat of established order, an event unfolded on a warm, sun-dappled afternoon in a leafy suburb that would forever alter the narrative of leadership. In a world where power was long reserved for those with decades of experience and unassailable authority, the appearance of one small, unassuming girl sent shockwaves through every corner of the nation. It was as if the cosmos had conspired to present a living allegory, a symbol of renewal and hope that defied every preconception about age and wisdom. Without fanfare, without pomp, and without a single word of rhetoric, the little heroine began an ascent that would soon upend the entrenched hierarchies of power. She appeared at a busy intersection outside a beloved local diner, an old establishment with neon lights that had seen generations of patrons come and go. Dressed in a simple sundress that had clearly known better days yet still exuded an air of unspoiled charm, her presence was as unexpected as a clear sky after a long rainy season. Her eyes, bright and unclouded by the burdens of adult experience, scanned the world with a curious intensity that belied her tender age. In that moment, every passerby, from suited professionals hurrying past in downtown business districts to local residents walking their dogs along tree-lined streets, paused, transfixed by the silent, profound magnetism of this child. There was no grand announcement, no rallying cry that signaled her arrival. Instead, her impact was subtle yet undeniable. As she walked along the cracked sidewalks of her hometown, a place where every building, every street corner, carried stories of hard-won triumphs and the quiet dignity of everyday life, she seemed to radiate an inner light. It was a light that spoke of unbridled hope, a reminder that beneath the veneer of cynicism and the weight of past disappointments, there still flickered the pure flame of possibility. In her unspoken determination, the little girl embodied an ancient truth, that sometimes, the most profound change comes not from the thunderous roar of power but from the gentle whisper of innocence. News of her presence spread like wildfire. Within hours, local radio stations, community bulletins, and social media feeds were abuzz with images and accounts of the girl whose very existence challenged the long-held belief that only the seasoned and battle-hardened could lead. In town halls and city council meetings, where citizens had long debated policy with a reverence for tradition, murmurs began to circulate that perhaps it was time to rethink the very nature of leadership. Maybe, some said quietly, true leadership lies not in the accumulation of years but in the purity of vision, a vision that a child might possess. In cafes and diners, over cups of steaming coffee and slices of apple pie, everyday Americans found themselves engaged in passionate discussions about the future, a future that now seemed to belong as much to the young and hopeful as it did to the established order. The little girl's journey was marked by moments that were as quietly heroic as they were inexplicably profound. On one occasion, while strolling through a community park where families picnicked on well-worn blankets and children played on creaking swings, she paused to help an elderly man retrieve a wayward newspaper that had been caught in the branches of a sprawling oak. The gesture was simple, a small act of kindness, but in that instant, those who witnessed it felt an overwhelming surge of inspiration. It was as if the act of compassion had reaffirmed a long-forgotten truth, that leadership is not measured by the weight of responsibility alone, but by the capacity to touch lives with genuine care and humility. As the day unfolded, the girl's silent revolution gathered momentum. Crowds began to form around her wherever she went, a spontaneous congregation of curious onlookers, hopeful dreamers, and even skeptical traditionalists who found themselves inexplicably moved by the purity of her presence. Her path, unadorned by the trappings of power or the embellishments of rhetoric, cut through the city like a beam of unfiltered light. It was a light that penetrated the murk of cynicism and complacency, inviting those who had long been resigned to the status quo to reconsider what true greatness might look like. In her eyes, there was no pretense, no facade, only the unvarnished truth that sometimes, the simplest gestures are the ones that carry the greatest weight. This unexpected rise, so quietly revolutionary in its nature, began to reshape the contours of public discourse. Schools, community centers, and even local government offices buzzed with debates over the meaning of leadership in this new age. For many, the little girl became a living metaphor, a symbol of hope in a time when the traditional pillars of power seemed increasingly out of touch with the needs of a rapidly changing society. Her ascent was not marked by the thunderous applause of mass rallies or the orchestrated spectacle of televised addresses. Instead, It was celebrated in the small, heartfelt moments shared between strangers on park benches and in the soft smiles exchanged between neighbors on familiar streets. By twilight, as the city's skyline transformed into a silhouette against a canvas of deep indigo and scattered stars, the impact of her presence was undeniable. The established order, personified by stalwarts like Jackson Rivers, found itself confronted by a force that was both gentle and inexorable, a force that did not roar to claim authority but whispered of a future where the old and the new might coexist in harmony. In that quiet revolution, every step she took became a quiet challenge to convention, a tender reminder that even the most entrenched powers must someday yield to the pure, unadulterated promise of change. And so, in the lingering afterglow of that extraordinary day, as city lights began to twinkle like distant constellations over busy streets and quiet suburbs alike, the nation was left with a single resonant truth: that true leadership might one day be defined not by the accumulation of accolades and the weight of years, but by the innocent, fearless hope embodied in the eyes of one small girl, a hope that could, with quiet determination, redefine the very future of America. In the hushed twilight of a city steeped in history, where decades of American tradition converged with the restless spirit of modernity, an extraordinary confluence of worlds began to take shape. Here, in neighborhoods where weathered brick buildings stood as monuments to a storied past, and glass towers reached ambitiously toward an uncertain future, the long-accepted certainties of the old guard were gradually challenged by the vibrant, unpredictable pulse of change. It was at this very intersection that the age-old struggle between the venerable and the visionary unfolded, a struggle as timeless as it was immediate, as personal as it was universal. The setting for this dramatic collision was a city that had long prided itself on its dual identity, a place where the echoes of jazz clubs and historic downtown districts mingled with the cutting-edge innovations of Silicon Alley, where diners that had served generations of families stood just a stone's throw from bustling co-working spaces and trendy cafes. Here, the remnants of America's golden past were etched into every cobblestone and wrought iron balcony, yet the winds of change swept persistently through every alley and avenue. Against this backdrop, the venerable legacy of leaders like Jackson Rivers, symbols of steadfast tradition and hard-won wisdom, found themselves pitted against the raw, unfiltered energy embodied by the new generation, most notably represented by the unexpected ascent of a little girl whose presence had become the spark for a broader revolution. In quiet corners of the city, along tree-lined boulevards and within time-worn community centers where the portraits of past luminaries gazed down from faded walls, old-timers gathered to reminisce about the days when leadership was defined by duty, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to the nation's founding ideals. Their voices, measured and laden with experience, recounted tales of civic triumphs, of battles fought against adversity, and of the unyielding moral fortitude that had once seemed to guarantee the longevity of the American dream. Yet even as these cherished memories were recited with a sense of nostalgic reverence, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. For all their accolades, these traditional values were increasingly coming into conflict with a new paradigm, a paradigm that challenged the very notion that authority was solely the domain of the seasoned and the battle-scarred. On the opposite side of this unfolding drama were the voices of a generation eager to redefine what it meant to lead in a rapidly evolving world. In lively public forums held at renovated warehouses turned cultural hubs, in the vibrant chatter of social media threads, and even in the quiet deliberations of families gathered around dinner tables in suburban homes, a new discourse was taking shape. Here, the emphasis was not on the weight of past glories but on the promise of untapped potential, a belief that leadership could emerge from unexpected quarters, unburdened by the constraints of tradition. It was in this fervent debate that the image of the little girl, innocent yet resolute, unassuming yet powerful, became a potent symbol of renewal. Her every step, each silent act of kindness, was seen as a repudiation of the old order and an embrace of a future where ideas, rather than age or rank, would define true authority. The collision of these two worlds was not a violent confrontation but a gradual, organic melding, a process akin to the slow yet inexorable erosion of ancient stone by the gentle caress of a river. As daylight waned and the amber glow of streetlights bathed the city in a soft, almost reverential light, the barriers between old and new began to blur. The venerable institutions, with their time-worn routines and storied legacies, started to yield, if only imperceptibly, to the unrelenting tide of innovation and youthful optimism. Even the proud figures of the past, who had once commanded unwavering respect, found themselves questioning whether the rigid structures of old could continue to stand unchallenged in the face of such pure, unadulterated hope. The city itself became a living canvas upon which this remarkable transformation was painted. Historic neighborhoods, with their faded murals and time-worn storefronts, now found themselves sharing space with gleaming new developments and bold public art installations celebrating diversity and progress. In parks and plazas, the laughter of children intermingled with the soft strains of blues and country music, creating a harmonious medley that spoke of a nation in the midst of rebirth. The very architecture of the city, where glass and steel embraced weathered brick and time-honored stone, mirrored the fusion of eras, suggesting that perhaps the future of American leadership lay not in the rejection of the past, but in its thoughtful reimagining. In intimate conversations on front porches and over backyard barbecues, neighbors of all ages began to share their hopes and dreams for a new kind of community, a community in which the lessons of history were not discarded but reinterpreted through the lens of modern challenges. Elders, once wary of change, found themselves inspired by the fresh perspectives of youth, while young activists learned to appreciate the hard-won wisdom that had shaped the nation through decades of triumph and trial. It was in these quiet exchanges that the seeds of a new leadership were sown, a leadership that would draw strength not from the exclusivity of power, but from the collective spirit of collaboration, empathy, and mutual respect. As dusk deepened into night, and the city's skyline shimmered against a velvet backdrop of stars, the intersection of worlds revealed its most profound truth, that the future of leadership did not lie in a binary opposition between the old and the new, but in their inevitable synthesis. The stalwart ideals of America's storied past, when infused with the vitality and unyielding hope of youth, held the promise of forging a society where every voice could be heard and every heart could lead. In that delicate balance, where tradition met innovation in a gentle yet resolute embrace, there blossomed the possibility of a truly unified nation, one that celebrated its heritage while boldly stepping into a future defined by compassion, creativity, and a shared belief in the power of renewal. In the final transformative chapters of this unfolding American saga, the long-held notion that power is measured solely by years of experience or the weight of established institutions gave way to a revolutionary idea, that true leadership is born of the heart, nurtured by a rare blend of courage, compassion, and untainted innocence. As the nation found itself at the crossroads of history, where the echoes of past glories intertwined with the fervent hopes of a new generation, a fresh paradigm emerged, one that redefined what it meant to lead and be led in a rapidly changing world. For decades, the pillars of American leadership had been built on the rock-solid foundations of tradition and authority. Men like Jackson Rivers had been celebrated for their steadfast resolve, their ability to navigate the turbulent waters of national crises with a cool, measured hand. Their names were etched in the annals of history, and their legacies, immortalized in the hallowed halls of government, were seen as immutable symbols of order and stability. Yet, as the winds of change gathered strength, it became increasingly clear that the future would demand a different kind of leadership, one that could rise above the limitations of the past and embrace the promise of a new dawn. At the heart of this transformation was the extraordinary example set by the little girl whose quiet revolution had captured the nation's imagination. With every unassuming step she took along familiar American streets, from the vibrant murals of urban neighborhoods to the serene sidewalks of suburban communities, she demonstrated that leadership is not the exclusive domain of the battle-hardened, but a quality that can blossom in the unlikeliest of places. Her presence was a living repudiation of the notion that authority must be hoarded by those who have lived through decades of triumph and loss. Rather, it was a reminder that the purity of vision and the freshness of perspective can be as potent as any long-established tradition. Across the country, from bustling metropolises to quiet Midwestern towns, citizens began to re-examine what it truly meant to hold power. In lively town hall meetings, over backyard cookouts, and within the digital forums of social media, the old metrics of leadership, seniority, accolades, and rigid hierarchies were being replaced by a new standard. People spoke of empowerment in a language that celebrated empathy, collaboration, and the kind of moral clarity that only an unburdened, youthful spirit can bring. The realization dawned that every act of kindness, every shared word of encouragement, and every gesture of genuine care was a building block in the creation of a leadership that was as much about community as it was about command. In this reimagined landscape, the symbols of power underwent a profound metamorphosis. The once imposing monuments of authority, whether they were the marble columns of government edifices or the grand portraits of venerable statesmen, began to take on new meanings. They no longer stood as immutable relics of a bygone era, but as reminders that the strength of a nation is measured by its ability to evolve, to learn, and to embrace the unexpected. The legacy of Jackson Rivers, with all its storied triumphs and poignant vulnerabilities, became interwoven with the emerging narrative, a narrative that celebrated the harmonious fusion of experience and unspoiled hope. As the days turned into weeks and the pulse of change quickened, communities across America experienced a quiet yet profound awakening. In public schools, educators wove lessons about civic responsibility and compassion into the curriculum, inspiring children to see themselves as the leaders of tomorrow. In local government offices, officials began to engage more deeply with citizens, actively seeking the fresh ideas that could only come from those unburdened by the cynicism of too many years. And in the intimate spaces of family living rooms and neighborhood coffee shops, conversations blossomed into movements, a collective acknowledgement that the future of leadership was not reserved for a select few, but was the shared right and responsibility of every individual. The birth of this new leadership was not heralded by the bombastic fanfare of political rallies or the blaring of patriotic anthems from massive speakers. Instead, it arrived gently, like the first light of dawn that dispels the darkness of night. It was evident in the quiet smiles exchanged between strangers, in the heartfelt embraces shared by neighbors who had long been divided by differences, and in the earnest determination of a society that was finally ready to cast aside the heavy chains of outdated dogma. In the eyes of those who dared to dream of a better tomorrow, power was redefined as the capacity to uplift, to inspire, and to transform the mundane into the magnificent through acts of sincere humanity. As the nation gathered its collective breath in that historic moment, when the old guard bowed its head before the rising tide of renewed spirit, a new chapter in American history was being written. The realization that true leadership lies in the willingness to listen to one's heart, to acknowledge both the scars of the past and the bright promise of the future, resonated like a clarion call across every corner of the country. It was a call to embrace change without fear, to celebrate the unexpected, and to recognize that every citizen, regardless of age or status, possessed the potential to be a beacon of hope. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon on that transformative day, the nation had been irrevocably changed. The traditional markers of power, the impenetrable walls of authority and the rigid hierarchies that had long defined American leadership, were giving way to a more fluid, dynamic form of governance. A form that celebrated the delicate interplay between time-honored wisdom and the unbridled creativity of youth. A form that recognized that in the gentle interplay of power and innocence lay the very soul of a nation reborn. In the soft glow of streetlights and the reflective calm of midnight, as families and friends gathered to share stories of hope and renewal, the message was clear. The future belonged to those who dared to dream differently, who embraced change with open arms, and who understood that leadership was not about imposing one's will from a pedestal but about nurturing the inherent goodness in every human heart. The little girl whose unassuming journey had sparked a movement, had become the living embodiment of this new truth, a truth that promised that with courage, empathy, and the purity of one's vision, even the most time-worn traditions could be reimagined for the betterment of all. Thus, in that defining moment, a moment when the boundaries between the old and the new blurred into insignificance, the nation discovered that the greatest power lay not in the hands of a few, but in the collective, tender heartbeat of an America ready to rise, united in the pursuit of a brighter, more compassionate future.